Good morning, Dawg Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are in New Orleans for one final time here, not having the conversation we want to have, but somehow seemingly the conversation I've had to have in this city the day after the game far more often than I would have liked over the course of years. It seems like that's been the case. But either way, we'll talk about all of it today, kind of what went wrong for Georgia against Notre Dame, why this season ends without a chance to play for a national championship, and where things go from here for UGA on a Friday. That means Jeff Sentell. He's going to stop by live here today to talk to us more about that. We'll react to the key moments from last night's game, what Kirby Smart had to say about that, and just try to put the pieces back together after what has obviously been a challenging week for everybody in the city, but in specifics as far as this game goes, certainly a game that gives us no shortage of things to talk about. So we're happy to have you with us for it. We're also happy to be getting back home here very soon, too. So what do you say we take care of some business? We can do just that. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, I'm reminded of how I started shows a couple of times during the year where after a Georgia loss, I came on the air and very honestly said, I don't know how this season's going to end for Georgia, and I warned you at the time, and I think many of you knew I was telling the truth, that there was a very good chance this was just not going to be a national championship team here for UGA in 2024. That just may be what the story of this season was going to be, a little bit short of that lofty goal. But what I also said over and over was, as a fan who also has the privilege of talking to you on this show every day as the show host, as a fan and show host, even if it can't be a national championship, I want it to go as long as it can. I want the run for UGA to extend as deeply into the season as it could. And I think now when we look back on the 2024 season, now over and done with, that's what happened. I think this Georgia team probably made it about as far as they were going to go. And it is no small feat to make the college football playoff. It is certainly no small feat to win this SEC, especially in an SEC like this now that is expanded with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, and obviously forcing Georgia to play a schedule that I think is essentially unprecedented. To think that you could win the SEC in the deepest year ever for the league, that's something worth bragging about. That's certainly something worth talking about. And I would imagine in the weeks and the months to come, we are going to have plenty of discussions about happy moments and memories and cool stuff and, you know, sort of, I guess, bragging rights for Georgia that still exist and are no less true even after a disappointing defeat at the hands of Notre Dame. But while all of that will happen for us in the future, I do think it's appropriate, certainly today, to talk about what we've just seen. And, you know, I can't help but say that leading into this game, if you're a regular listener or a regular viewer to DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger, you know, we did talk a little bit about this. And listen, I don't try to put myself in the center of all these discussions. This is a discussion about Georgia football. I just happen to be facilitating it. It's not about me. But I did say over and over again that I just wasn't so sure about Georgia going into this game. And I just wasn't really all that sure about Georgia in general, that the challenge of starting a quarterback for the very first time in the playoff, that's a significant one. I thought that people downplayed that way too much. And frankly, I think the narrative that built up around Gunner for most of the last few weeks was totally unfair, although I did think he played pretty well. More on that coming up in a moment. But in addition to Stockton making his first start, this is also a Georgia team that has had some problems seem to repeat and echo throughout most of this season, and a lot of that was kind of on display last night. And, you know, we're standing here in New Orleans and we're doing a show, and I'm remembering about, like, say, you know, believe it or not, it's actually been, 6 years since Georgia's lost a non-conference game. The last time that happened, we also the next day would have done a show in New Orleans after Georgia lost to Texas. And when you think about that era of Georgia football, like, say, 2018 and 2019, when Georgia was trying to get to the championship level and trying to kind of become that team. One of the things you saw was back then, hey, it's a Georgia defense that's going to give you a chance to win every game, and they're just trying to find just enough offense to make it happen. That's sort of what the story was. Boy, didn't it feel like this was a little bit of a callback to that, where this Georgia defense last night, I thought, played their hearts out, man. I thought they laid it on the line and kept keeping Georgia in this football game. But there's just not enough offense. And I don't really put a lot of that on Gunner Stockton. I thought, for the most part, Gunner Stockton played a pretty good game. We'll let you hear in a few minutes what Kirby Smart had to say about that. I thought Stockton was fine. I thought Stockton gave you a chance to win. But whether it's massive issues with the offensive line or just the return of the same thing that's been going on, it's almost comical, really, how many drops that Georgia has had by wide receivers. They came last night at just back-breaking moments. This is just not a Georgia offense that was going to be able to propel this team to a national championship. It just wasn't. They just didn't have the firepower on that side of the ball. And, the big question we would have asked to begin the season of, well, how does Georgia replace a Brock Bowers? How does Georgia replace even a Ladd McConkey, who's, certainly a significant playmaker, not the legendary figure that Brock Bowers is, but still a significant playmaker. How does Georgia replace guys like that? And now that this season is done, if we're being honest, we have to say they didn't replace them. They never really found that level of firepower, with this offense, that level of just, playmaking ability with this offense. They just didn't have that. And I think you're now left to wonder, okay, well, then where does Georgia go from here? So let's start with this. Kirby Smart last night kind of asked a direct question about the state of his offense and, where things are after only scoring 10 points against Notre Dame and kind of seeing the Fighting Irish, without putting a whole lot of offense together themselves, find a way to get a fairly convincing victory. This is what Kirby Smart said about the state of his offense after last night's game.
Well, I attribute to, number one, some really good defenses we played. I mean, that one was a really good defense. We have played some really good defenses. We've had a rotating a lineup with guys that have rolled in and out. And, we haven't created the same thing on defense we've done in the past. If you go to years past defense, we created more turnovers, better third downs to get the ball back. There's a lot of things we can do better to help our offense, but we certainly have to play better and do better. A lot of that has to do with health and the schedule we play and having some playmakers that can make some plays too.
So, look, the bottom line here is Kirby Smart's not going to entertain too much of the premise about that. He's not going to own very much of that in the moment. He's going to sidestep that. He's not going to litigate this kind of thing through the media or out in public. I think those of us who are Georgia fans, though, would certainly hope that Smart's private evaluation of all of this is completely different than what he's saying there. That I think it has to be noticed that a lot of stuff on that side of the ball for Georgia this year has just looked pretty hard, and frankly harder than it's supposed to look. And as I said before, the conversation about what you do about that, I think, is going to be a pretty intense one. I don't know there are necessarily some easy answers. I would say that when you look at this within, I guess, two sort of twin pillars of possibility. There are some people who are going to be, all about you got to fire the coaches, you got to replace this guy, you got to do that. There's going to be some of that conversation that takes place and has been taking place among fans. And what I'm here to tell you is I'm not necessarily, I guess, against that. I'm somewhat ambivalent about that, because what I really view the biggest issue as being, and I think we've seen some of this play out with some of the transfer portal stuff over the course of the last couple of weeks, that if we're being candid, and my goal today with you is to be as candid as I possibly can be, if we're being candid, we would assume that Georgia is a program that is not spending as big, not, paying as large of a sum of its NIL budget towards wide receivers as other programs are. And there are perhaps a lot of reasons why Georgia's doing that. They're just simply not spending as big as others are. And sometimes the performance on the field ends up looking like a team that's not spending as much on its wide receivers as other programs are. So if I could only choose sort of one hot topic for the offseason in terms of, what Georgia needs to address and what Georgia needs to think about, for me, it's how do you expect to have the kind of elite, dynamic, playmaking talent if you're not willing to spend as much, or maybe it's capabilities if you're not capable of spending as much as other programs are. What's your plan to address that other than just putting up the big dollars in the NIL world for these players that other programs seem to be willing to do? Because while I know that guys like Mike Bobo perhaps are not as popular, with a lot of Georgia fans right now, based on what I think I know about football, which is admittedly limited, based on what I think I'm seeing with my own eyes, which, perhaps is, not the full picture, I don't think there's anything wrong with Mike Bobo's play calling, whether it be in this game or this season or the 2-year stint that he's had here working with Kirby Smart. I don't think there's anything wrong with Mike Bobo's play calling that couldn't be fixed with more dynamic playmaking talent. We sat there for 60 minutes yesterday looking for somebody to break out and somebody to do something. And unfortunately, in this game, that moment just never really came, because the best we can tell right now, to be frank, it doesn't look like that player is necessarily on this roster here right now. So I think that's a pretty big issue. Now, to sort of take this to a, more positive place here for a moment, in the midst of an offensive performance for Georgia that just wasn't good enough to win this game or compete for a national championship and be a part of the kind of elite picture in college football, I was actually pretty impressed with the debut of Gunner Stockton. I thought that people put way too much on Stockton before this game. I thought, trying to make him the sort of the next generation of Stetson Bennett was so unfair to him. And I thought there was a lot of attention being given to him that we try to do our part, around here to downplay as much as we could. But even in the face of all that, I thought that Gunner really gave Georgia a chance to win this game last night. And if Gunner Stockton's the starting quarterback for Georgia in 2025, and I believe that he probably will be, I think that Georgia can be in pretty good hands with him based on what I saw last night. He seemed, look, there were some issues and things like that, but some of that's also related to just making your very first start. Overall, though, I thought it was a pretty good game for Stockton, and Kirby Smart after the game gave his evaluation of Gunner too.
Gunner did some good things. Anytime you don't have pass pro, it's tough. And he had some tough moments out there when it's your backside and you can't see it coming. That's tough. I thought he tucked it down and ran. He got us out of a couple sacks with his feet and legs, threw the ball away, did some good things there. But obviously it wasn't enough with the 2 turnovers. And we got to be better for sure.
So that's the evaluation that Kirby Smart gives of Gunner Stockton. And listen, in any game like this, there's going to be some good, there's going to be some bad. And when it's a season-ending loss, there's going to be moments in which you're looking at things that probably need to be corrected and moments where you think, hey, this is maybe something to build on. In the case of Gunner Stockton, I thought that he gave Georgia some stuff to build on. And I thought that Gunner Stockton had the look of a guy who could be a part of the foundation of this program moving forward. But there has got to be more help around the quarterback. There has just got to be somebody who can bail you out of tough spots. In previous years for Georgia, that would have been a Brock Bowers, perhaps would have been a Ladd McConkey, but we never saw that version of those kinds of playmakers on this team. And moving forward in the future, I think that's got to be fixed. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We're glad you're with us and looking forward to coming back home after what has been a long stretch of time here for us in New Orleans. But we're happy about being back with all of you in our normal confines back again on Monday. And, of course, we're so thankful to everybody at Kroger who makes all this possible for us here. And as we kind of roll through the new year, Kroger's got a great way for you to get that started. Take advantage of all the very interesting and creative ways that Kroger's giving you more time to enjoy the things you love, perhaps more money in your pocket there too. For 30 days right now, you can try Kroger Boost for free. That's a chance to save up to $1,000 a year when you earn twice the fuel points on the things you're already buying. there at your local Kroger. And also, as a Kroger Boost member, you get a chance to take advantage of free grocery delivery and things like that. So check them out online today at Kroger.com/boost. That is Kroger.com/boost for a lot more on that. We're so happy to have Kroger as a part of our program. We're also happy to have all of you. Happy to have Jeff Sentell coming up in a moment. We're going to break from our normal recruiting talk. We bring on Jeff here. We're going to end up talking about basically what we saw last night. Jeff's got a different perspective than I do because I'm up in the press box, and Jeff's down on the field. So Jeff gives you a little bit of a thought on that. Jeff was also with Georgia coaches and players in the locker room last night after it was over with. So Jeff will give us some pretty important insight on all of that, and we'll do that with Jeff Sentell here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, let's also get ready to go around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. And there's always going to be a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking that goes on after a game like this. And I think a lot of that, when you get to the real specifics, there are a couple things. One of those is the late game situation where Georgia was ended up drawing off sides by kind of a clever move by Marcus Freeman that Kirby Smart said he wasn't quite so sure it was legal. We'll get to the fake, attempted a punt that turned into a fourth down conversion because Georgia jumped off sides, and I guess the video suggests maybe Notre Dame false started before all that happened. We'll get to all that here coming up. I'll talk to Jeff about that. Let me instead focus on what happened earlier than that in the game. Near the end of the first half, there's the sequence where, and you almost got to start kind of before you got to the final, minute of the first half. So Georgia on defense facing a third and 3, something like that. I thought did a really good job getting off the field with Notre Dame, forcing that punt. Now Georgia's got it. I'm not as good with the time stuff as some of y'all are. But now Georgia's got it late inside of 2 minutes at least, kind of 90 seconds, whatever it was. So in a situation like that, Georgia throws it 3 straight times, and, man, it is just 3 and out as quick as you can go right there. And, I'm not going to nitpick the play calls. I'm not going to do, anything like that. But, not to say that you couldn't. I'm just saying I'm just going to simply focus on the results. Just 3 straight. Just 3 and out so quick. Just you can't get the ball up that quickly in that spot. You have to have something going on offensively, especially after your defense had just done such a good job of getting itself off the field, giving you a chance, and then just to give it back up right so quick, that had to be demoralizing at that point for the Georgia sideline. You imagine it just sort of had to be. Well, then Notre Dame gets a field goal, then Georgia comes back, and that's where, trying to throw the ball with 40 seconds left. Pass rush for Notre Dame comes off the edge. One of the issues that Monroe Freeling had in yesterday's game. Stockton gets hit, ball's loose. Notre Dame gets it, they score. Then obviously that led to the kick return touchdown at the beginning of the third quarter. And that span of time, about a little bit more than 2 minutes worth of game clock. A little bit more than 2 minutes worth of game clock, and all of a sudden that kind of just ended almost any chance that Georgia had to win this game. And some people are going to sort of place blame on Kirby Smart and perhaps Mike Bobo for being too aggressive at the end of that first half. Let's hear Kirby Smart, his explanation for that, whether or not he thought, in retrospect, they had kind of pushed the envelope too much at the end of the first half. This is what Kirby Smart said.
Yeah, typically when you're down, you need every possession you can have. And we made a decision that we were going to be aggressive and try to go 2 minute. That's what everything says you should do. You can't give up possessions when you're trailing. So we're down 6-3. We felt like we had a little quick game pass. Certainly not counting on getting beat that quick, that left tackle, and got a sack fumble, which gave them some momentum. But at the end of the day, we got a great red area defense. We should stop them, and we don't play passive here. So we play to be aggressive, and we're trying to go score.
So I think that for me, and I feel like I'm different. I will hear from Jeff Sentell in a moment. He expressed a different opinion on our postgame show last night. I'm glad that he did, because I think it reflects what many of you think. I actually don't mind Georgia being aggressive right there. Over the course of the last couple of years, when I've been watching football, one of the things I always get worried about as it relates to Georgia is sometimes just how few possessions it gets because of how the clock rules have changed, where it sort of seems like you blink your eye and the quarter's over, you blink your eye and the first half's over, and sometimes it feels like you've barely had the ball. And the thing for me that was looming at the end of the first half was the fact that Notre Dame was also going to get the ball to start the second half. So I really don't have a problem with Georgia taking the aggressive mindset of, if we've got a possession, even if it's only 40 seconds, we're going to try to get something out of it. I really don't mind that. I just think it needs to work better. I think it just needs to be more effective if you're going to do it. Now, Kirby was also asked about whether that decision should have been influenced by, or perhaps, was kind of coming from a place of desperation, given the fact that Georgia, with a quarterback starting his very first game, just wasn't doing very much prior to that, and should that maybe have made Georgia more cautious about all of this? Kirby Smart also addressed that after the game, too.
No, I don't think so. I think we did move the ball. We turned it over. So we had more yards than they did at the time, and we had more passing yards than they did at the time. So I don't see it as just go in the shell. We got an opportunity. We got timeouts. We got an opportunity to go score. We work 2 minutes every week, and we stay aggressive with it. I mean, we got a really good pass pro team, and we didn't pick him up on that play. Made a great rush, and he got a sack fumble. But I don't question that call, because I really agree with the decision to be aggressive and try to go score.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm in the minority here with most Georgia fans, but I do kind of buy that logic from Kirby Smart. You had a chance to go out and make a play, be aggressive, and get that done. I really don't mind that from Kirby there. I just wish it would have worked better, and probably it should have worked better. That if you got a possession, take advantage of that. Georgia was not able to do that, not because I believe of a bad coaching decision. I just think it ended up being pretty poor execution on the field. But there's no denying that's sequence. A couple of minutes before the end of the first half, the kick return touchdown to begin the third quarter. Georgia at that moment seemed pretty out of sorts and playing far below the standard we've come to expect from Georgia. And obviously that's a huge reason why UGA ended up losing this game. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Obviously, Zagoria Law, very focused on a pretty specific area of the law. If somebody has been bitten by a dog that wasn't properly cared for, hurt or injured by a dog in a similar situation, I want you to trust the official dog bite injury lawyers, the Georgia Bulldogs, to get you the proper compensation you think you deserve, just like any other kind of personal injury case. This is a law firm that sort of specializes in these kinds of personal injury cases. They literally wrote the book on how to win in cases like this. So I want you to find them online. Their website is ZagoriaLaw.com. You can spell it Z-A-G-O-R-I-A, ZagoriaLaw.com. You can also give them a call, 833-GA-DOG-BITE. That's 833-GA-DOG-BITE, dog spelled conventionally, D-O-G. If someone you love, or if perhaps you yourself been injured or bitten by a dog that wasn't yours, that was maybe not handled and taken care of the way that it should have been, let's let them fight for you and get the compensation you think you deserve. Talk to our friends at Zagoria Law today. Great to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse. All right, one of the big questions that's out there for Georgia right now in the immediate aftermath of the Sugar Bowl is what's about to happen to the transfer portal. We'll get to that before we're done on the program today. But for now, on more of, I guess, the official kind of look back on everything that happened in the Sugar Bowl, where it went wrong and how Georgia fixes it maybe moving forward. Let's get some more insight on that from a guy who was watching it closely last night, Jeff Sentell, here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
For those watching on video, I have to ask, what are you so dressed up for?
Brandon, what's the Deion Sanders thing? You look good, you play good. Well, everybody feels terrible. Everybody's ready to get out of this place. So, if you dress up a little bit, maybe you lift your spirits a little bit.
Are you flying first class? Why are you wearing a sport coat?
To be very honest, and to keep in touch with the really common man, I'm out of clothes.
I am too, man.
I'm out of clothes, and I'm like, well, this is all I got left. This was our, when you're out with Brandon Adams on the town in New Orleans, you expect at least one or two pinky sipping dinners. So I just had to make sure that I was good for it.
It is funny. Jeff and I taking very different tacks to the same problem. And people don't care about this, but I'll say it anyway. I'm so out of clothes. We've been here longer than we expected to be. I wore the same DawgNation pullover 3 times. Now I'm wearing just a sweatshirt. So that's not, so we're kind of both, I guess, sort of addressing the same issue. And speaking of addressing issues, there's plenty of that to do for Georgia here right now. I want to re-rack something you and I talked about last night on our DawgNation postgame show, because we just heard Kirby Smart talking about it. I don't mind being in the minority on this. There's plenty of moments, I guess, when I'm kind of the contrarian opinion. I do think most Georgia fans agree with you, so I'm going to set you up to say it. Kirby Smart just sort of gave an explanation for why he was aggressive at the end of the first half. I actually like being aggressive. I like taking advantage of every possession you're going to get, especially knowing that Notre Dame is going to get the ball to begin the third quarter. But you last night were a lot of Georgia fans and thought that was just too risky with a first-time starter quarterback, somewhat deep in your own territory, perhaps wreaking a little bit of desperation. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in fact, let me let you kind of pick up there, because I think a lot of Georgia fans agree more with your perspective that maybe that was just a little too much from Georgia at the end of that half.
Yeah, I don't know what the analytics look like on that BA, but it's like 37 seconds. Georgia didn't have a run game. Their receivers weren't getting open, getting a lot of separation. Like, to me, it's a high stakes. I love what Kirby said about give confidence to our quarterback. I just don't know in 37 seconds the way that Georgia offense had been matriculating down the field. I just don't know. Brandon, what are you going to get in 37 seconds? Are you going to get a deep shot, an intermediate shot? You're going to get close enough for Peyton Woodring to get 3? I mean, I don't know in any circumstances the Georgia offensive play callers thought, yeah, we're going to go down and get 7 in 37 seconds. Especially with the following condition. Man, I think Gunner Stockton played great last night. I think he's going to play great football for Georgia, especially for a first start, especially for a stage, especially against a team like Notre Dame. But 37 seconds at that situation was a high risk, low reward look at that for 3 points. Maybe in the huddle on the headsets, everybody's like, hey, I got 2 good plays. We can get down there. We can do this. The execution falls when Monroe Freeling is not able to hold that backside block on Gunner. But I just look at that one, and I've seen a lot of teams in Super Bowls, Brandon, big football games where you just sit there and you fight another day. I think Gunner Stockton, that offense, was quite capable of going down the field, maybe with another minute on the clock, maybe in a 2-minute offense setting. I just don't think with 37 seconds, the juice right there was worth the squeeze.
So I want to deal with another situation from the game, and then we'll kind of get into some of the other, I guess, big topics. Situationally, you move, far later at almost the very end of the game. I thought Marcus Freeman was pretty savvy with his attempt. Was 4th and 1 from their own 18-yard line. Do I have the specific? It's inside the 20, 18-yard line, I think it was. So he runs his punt team out, then subs all 11 guys off. I actually thought Georgia did a pretty good job of reacting to that in the moment without having to call a timeout. The best I could tell, they got their defense back on the field. And it's so weird to me, this ends up being a big moment from the game, because a lot of us who are like college football obsessives, we just spent the weekend arguing about what had happened with Brett Bielema and Shane Beamer around the substitution rule and the fact that Beamer thought Bielema was dragging his feet with the subs. It's the same thing that Tennessee essentially got penalized for against Georgia back during the season. So it's weird that this is kind of a hot topic today, because I feel like we talked about this, at least some of us online, a lot this weekend. It's interesting to me anyway. But ultimately, when Georgia got its defense back out there in the change of all of that, Jalen Walker, who's a legend. I mean, Georgia, just one of my favorite players to come through UGA. He ends up jumping off sides. There's video evidence out there that suggests maybe a Notre Dame receiver on the wide side of the formation perhaps false started before Walker jumped off. But what did you make of that sequence? Obviously, Kirby Smart has said that Steve Shaw, who's the director of officiating, told him that SEC director of officiating told him that you can't sub all 11 guys in and out. I have no idea if that's true or not. It's a complicated topic to even address, but what did you make of the situation that resulted in a Jalen Walker offsides and kind of, once again, sort of a last-ditch effort for Georgia that ends up falling short in a lot of ways because of that play?
Yeah, I thought it's a good example of, like, Marcus Freeman. A lot of people say that Georgia got a little bit out-coached by Marcus Freeman and the Notre Dame staff, and I think that's a valid take. But when I look at that, I thought it was more of an example of Notre Dame had a lot of answers for Georgia, or had a great plan coming in. You toggle through a lot of the things that I saw. Number one, I think at worst-case scenario, I thought Notre Dame thought they might get Georgia to burn one of their timeouts, at least get them confused. I thought it was really intriguing when you know the backstory. Like, hey, we follow this for careers. We absorb as much information as we can, but you put in the fact that there's the Big 12 officiating crew running that game. And what Kirby Smart is referencing there, Brandon, is he's referencing a 2017 situation when Georgia was playing Tennessee, where he learned exactly that. And in this conference, you can't sub 11 for 11. The video evidence stood out really well, stood out pretty telling, where it looked like Notre Dame's wide receiver also had a false start as well, almost like in sync with the Georgia's guys jumping off sides. It's a whole lot of things about that crew, Brendan, because you remember Kirby also in his postgame comments remarked about the situation with the Georgia walk-on player being in the white boundary, and Kirby's interpretation of that rule is you usually get a sideline warning for that. Well, Big 12 officials, they call it a little bit differently than they do in the greatest conference in the land, and that's one of those things where I just felt like Notre Dame, now we talked about being aggressive earlier, where opinions will vary. Kirby Smart said we wanted to put confidence in our quarterback. We wanted to be aggressive. I think that's a good example of Notre Dame saying, hey, let's try and make a play where we can end this game right here and be aggressive on our end.
So let me do a couple of things here as it relates to that. Aggressive, I think, is a really good word. And in the case of like Marcus Freeman, he's a sharp coach. He really, how could he not earn a lot of respect from us based on the way that Notre Dame played last night? And we live in a day and age in which sharp coaches, aggressive coaches are going to try to exploit everything they can in the rule book. And certainly in that kind of punt situation that turned into the offense coming on the field, it had the look of trying to overwhelm and confuse the officials just as much as it was overwhelming and confusing Georgia. And I honestly don't even care that much about the false start. I think talking about the officiating is boring. I really, really do. We don't have a history of coming on here and whining and complaining about officials. It looked like it probably could have been a false start. That's not the reason Georgia lost. You can point to 1,000 self-inflicted wounds on the part of Georgia is the reason why they lost. I am not into talking about the officiating today, but I do want to talk about the way that play was administered, because it ought to be simple. If Kirby Smart says, well, I was told you couldn't do whatever, we can't have a situation where one guy from one league is saying one thing and the Big 12 guys are like, well, I don't know, maybe they can do it. Like, we've got to it ought to be just as clear. And maybe if you're watching the broadcast, I haven't seen the TV copy, maybe if you're watching the broadcast, maybe their rules official that's in with them was as clear as day about it, and if he was, I'll look forward to going back and watching it. But we can't have this situation where Kirby didn't get an explanation, and he said that the officials never offered him anything. This is a crucial play in this game, and if Kirby can't get an explanation as to what happened, then that's a failure. Not necessarily a bad call. It's improper administration. You understand what I'm saying? Like Kirby deserves an explanation for what happened, and we can't have different officials from different leagues interpreting something because the substitution rule is becoming one of the most important things in the sport because of how fast everybody wants to play, and just the way the game is played here in this era. That rule, arms out wide, waiting for the substitution, that's become one of the most important ways in which smart coaches are trying to exploit it. So therefore, the officials have got to know the rule right there. They've got to administer it clearly, and they've got to offer an explanation to the coach on the other side of it. I think Kirby was owed that last night.
Brandon, I believe if Kirby Smart does not still sit on a rules committee, he had sat on that rules committee for some time as one of the veteran, now coaching stewards in college football. And as I understand it, the rules committee makes the rules, and then the officials legislate the rules. So I think if anybody would have a pretty good idea of what happens there, aside from any regional tendencies with the officiating, I think Kirby would be that guy. Brendan, you were talking about Marcus being prepared, and I didn't pick this up until some people that were watching the broadcast were telling me about it. Did you notice the cutaways of Freeman? He had basically a brainiac analytics guy right next to him at every critical juncture, and he would literally look back, and the analytics guy would go. And then he would sit there and make some thing with his Dick Tracy decoder watch or whatever, and then he would call a play and dictate what Notre Dame did: run, throw, kick, punt on a lot of those situations. So it's kind of funny how you have Notre Dame trying to act like the smartest football team in the land by doing that in a very crucial juncture. But again, there's fumbles in this game, there's turnovers in this game, and there are some glaring calls in this game. Brendan, I think if we look back on all the Georgia broadcasts we've ever done, there's one or two things that sometimes help Georgia win in a close game, and there's one or two things that also offset the victory chances.
You mentioned the walk-on guy and whether or not that should have been – I'm sorry, I don't remember his name.
Parker Jones, I believe.
Okay, I'm really glad that did not turn into sort of the story of the game. And it's not the story of the game because Georgia's reason for losing is the guys that are actually playing on the field, not the guy on the sidelines. I'm really glad that didn't turn into more than it was. And whether or not it should have been a warning or not, the one thing I was talking to some people kind of, I guess, somewhat in the know after the game last night, I didn't know if the fact that the contact was so significant is if that's what led to the fact it was a penalty and not a warning, because it's a pretty solid bump. And somebody told me, well, bumps actually happen a pretty good bit. That there's actually, contact, because it's one of those things. I'm just not watching the sideline very frequently. I don't know how often contact occurs. In this particular case, it's pretty good contact, right? The official almost got knocked down. If it was it's almost like in basketball, the idea of a flagrant one or a flagrant two. It's almost like the contact was significant enough that they decided to just sort of throw the flag right there.
Yeah, Brandon, from covering a lot of games on the sidelines, you sometimes, especially as a photographer's post, you'll sit there, and one of the things, even at the high school level, when the play's coming, the official will sit there and go, I'm going to need all of this. I need you to clear that out. Yeah. And it's sometimes
it happens in high school all the time, too, because the high school sidelines are so narrow.
Yeah, and it's really egregious because sometimes you're like 5 yards off the sideline and he's like, I'm going to need a little bit more for that. And I'm like, what are you going to take, a little flanking maneuver to call the play? But, the other thing is, I don't know, video was all over this, and it looked like that the official was tracking down the field, and he was like right on the edge of the white as well. He wasn't now right down the belly of the lane like a perfect bowling strike at Mark Rick Dog Bowl, the Chick-fil-A Dog Bowl Classic or whatever. But that's one of those things, all these microcosms in the game. I mean, Brandon, I don't know how you look at it, but I look at it as, okay, it put Georgia 15 yards back from the end zone when they couldn't get the ball to the end zone anyway, and they had to settle for a field goal. So I would imagine the same play calls would have happened, the same everything would have happened, but Notre Dame just kind of rose up there anyway.
So one of the things I said before you joined us is, for me, this feels like a lot like the era that Georgia was in the last time it lost a non-conference game. And it is mind-boggling. It should be mind-boggling to all of us that before last night, Georgia had not lost a non-conference game in 6 years. That's a long time to go without losing a non-conference game. And not only had Georgia been winning those games, it had, for the most part, dominated non-conference competition. In fact, consider this for a moment. Before last night's loss, the last two bowl games Georgia had played have been the largest margins of victory in bowl history. And they lost last night to Notre Dame. But the point is that loss took us back to the last time Georgia lost a non-conference game in 2018. Ironically, would have stood right here in downtown New Orleans and did a show right after that. And that era of Georgia football where the defense gives you a chance to win, and can you find enough offense? The discussion that we're having today really seems to echo that, where there's perhaps not enough playmakers, perhaps there's just a little spark that seems to be missing from the Georgia offense. It just sort of feels like what we're saying today is a conversation that for the most part could have happened in 2018 or 2019, that era just before Georgia broke through and started winning national championships.
Yeah, the timestamp on that's pretty interesting, Brandon, because what happened after that, Georgia brings in a Todd Monken. Georgia brings in, at least in the modern era, the 2019 and 2020 recruiting classes, which were filled, laden, overjoyed cornucopia of receivers, and that's kind of what you have here. I guess you have another, crossroads. You have the fact that you see in college football now that, like a lot of people on social media, you're very honest with your opinions. I appreciate them. You don't want to get too enamored with all these rookie receivers coming in. I saw some folks call them, I don't want to see all these rookie of the year receivers coming in. I will caution folks that, that's one of those positions you can play right away now, especially if you're special. Like, you don't even have to be we saw how much of an impact even George Pickens made on Georgia's offense as a freshman. And the simple fact is Georgia doesn't even need that Jermaine Smith or Ryan Williams right now. They need a guy that can consistently get separation and they can catch the ball. And I think that there's a lot of guys in this class that can do that. Everybody's going to look at the play calling. I think you and I were both in alignment last night that we thought Bobo's calls were pretty much what Georgia needed. They weren't like, a new teach tape or a new clinic tape of how to undo a team in postseason play. But I don't think the glaring issue there was exactly how Bobo called the game, because I thought there were a couple times when I mean, listen, Brandon, like that's the one thing I keep coming back to on that strong point we're making about the end of the first half sequence. What was the narrative coming in? We got to get a run game going. We got to get offensive line going. We got to protect. We got to surround Gunner with a lot of good things where it's not all on him to just hike the team up by his bootstraps and move him down the field. But when you don't have that, you don't have those weapons around him. Like there's a kind of a narrative in college football that I agree with right now, and it's like, where do you allocate your dollars? I think Gunner Stockton is the type of player, if you surround him with NFL wide receivers, and Brandon, let's be honest, is there a day 3, day 2 pick in Georgia's wide receiver room right now?
Yeah, people certainly wonder.
I don't think there is, and maybe Arian Smith comes back. Maybe he becomes one of the guys in the room that can make a play, except maybe the only guy or the leading receiver on the team this year, Brandon. I think that would help because Georgia certainly needs more weapons. But one thing I thought Gunner showed is you give him a lot of playmakers around him, and then he can kind of make things happen. He showed he can handle things in a big spot. The other thing you think about now, Brandon, I know the stories are already up on DawgNation and popping out, is, it's our job as stewards covering this program about, what's next, what does next year's team look like. And I think if there's one thing you can pull out of that game is like, Gunner can play winning football for this team. Now it's just trying to go get him some help and who comes back.
So that's good stuff from Jeff Sentell. He mentioned stories at DawgNation.com. By the way, if you want the best of DawgNation's coverage of everything happening with Georgia football, and there's about to be a lot going down with, we would believe, players declaring for the NFL draft, players perhaps pursuing an option in the transfer portal, Georgia still maybe bringing guys in from the transfer portal. The news cycle around Georgia football is about to be incredibly busy, incredibly fast-paced. So if you want all the best coverage that we have here at DawgNation, we have a brand new newsletter for you to be a part of to get all of that. In fact, this is a major upgrade for us in kind of the newsletter category. I think if you've perhaps already been getting it, I think you're probably enjoying it, but many more of you are going to get a chance to experience this the very first time. So I want you to go to DawgNation.com/newsletter. That's DawgNation.com/newsletter. If you want all of the coverage of Georgia delivered, boom, right to you. When somebody goes to the transfer portal, when someone's maybe perhaps coming to visit Georgia out of the transfer portal, the freshman that could be making an immediate impact for Georgia next season, Jeff's great recruiting coverage, all of that. If you want it delivered to you right there in your inbox, is convenient, the best way to get the best coverage from DawgNation. I want you to check out DawgNation.com/newsletter for more on that. Get signed up, get it delivered right to you. I'm a part of this each and every day, and the DawgNation writers got their content in there. It's a great way to get the most information from the Georgia Bulldogs, courtesy of DawgNation, DawgNation.com/newsletter for more on that. All right, so let me kind of sum all this up by kind of going back to where I was a little earlier. I think, not to say that it has to be only one thing, but I think when you look at the kind of the main takeaway from a loss like last night, I think you got to sort of grab one thing and say, for now, I'm going to focus on this. And for me, my focus isn't so much on coaches who may be coming and going. There'll be plenty of time to talk about that. But the biggest issue I have is Georgia just doesn't seem to have that offensive playmaker right now. And once again, that's not to say I don't like the guys that Georgia has. I love these guys. I enjoy rooting for them. I'm proud of these guys. But we all know what superstar looks like. It's Brock Bowers at the end of the Auburn game in 2023 when they just kept feeding him over and over and over again. And in so many instances, he just put this team on his back. Georgia did not have the player that could put the team on his back this year. And I'm telling you, one superstar offensive player, whether it had been a running back or a tight end like Brock or a wide receiver, one superstar player would have changed that game last night. Notre Dame barely squashed a grape. They threw for 90 yards. I think they were outgained by Georgia, fewer yards per play, I believe. Y'all check my math on that, but I believe that's true. They weren't doing that much, but Georgia was doing even less. If you could have put one more Brock Ladd level player, boy, things could have been different. We started the year saying, how does Georgia replace a Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey? They never found an answer to that, Jeff, and I think the topic of this offseason's got to be, how do you get not good, but you need at least one great player? And I'm talking about like Jeremiah Smith. Like you got to have somebody that can just change the game, and right now Georgia doesn't.
So me and my good buddy Brandon, we did a good we had a broadcast last night, and it was like, what went wrong? Let's pop the hood. Let's figure it out. So I get back to my hotel room last night, and I have a step back moment. I start thinking, it's one of those cool things, when you mentioned the newsletter. One of the things I look forward to in the newsletter already is I think you're writing that. You got like 3-4 crisp, tidy, very efficient paragraphs at the top of it. Folks, if you ever wanted to get some Brandon Adams writing daily, because I love seeing it. I was like, there you go, Brandon. Brandon writing some high and tight, great.
I can barely read, but they will let me write a little bit, which is sort of amazing.
3 graphs, but I just had to get that one in there, man. You won't mind an additional plug for the newsletter, but my step back moment was this, Brandon. I looked at it. This is the first time in the Kirby Smart era where you can point to the Georgia offense and say, there is not a first or second round pick on the offense. Think about it for a second. Ladd McConkey, Brock Bowers, A.D. Mitchell, George Pickens, DeAndre Swift. Those are just the playmakers, Brandon. Let's also look at the offensive line. For the first time in a long time, Georgia doesn't have a first-round type of tackle. They don't have those guys in the program. Remember, we can talk about Mims. We can talk about Andrew Thomas. We can talk about Isaiah Wilson was a first-rounder at offensive tackle. And those guys are going to be harder to get, especially when you look at the way how much it costs to bring in one of those premier offensive tackles. And you sit there and, hey, maybe Georgia thinks it found one in another project. We're real smart guys in Jaw Jackson because he has this draw-dropping size. And, if that hits and that sticks, then that's great. But when you talk about this team, Brandon, it's always been heavy-handed defensively. It probably always will be heavy-handed defensively. And Georgia, it's not like they're scattered with them like Ohio State has been with throughout the years. Georgia's tried, the Zachariah Branches and the transfer portal. Georgia is trying to do that. You start thinking about, well, next year, is it Colby Young with favorable conditions in the ruling? Does he come back? Is he a first-round pick? I don't think so. And then is it Trevor Etienne who comes back and wants to run it back for another year when I don't even know if he's a second-round pick, maybe a third-round pick, especially the way he ended his season here in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl. But Georgia's always going to have guys defensively, but you think about this. Think about an A.D. Mitchell and what he did. Think about what Brock Bowers, we don't even need to waste any airtime on that, but about Ladd McConkey, who's proven himself to be a second-round pick and a credible NFL receiver. Georgia is going to be designed to dominate defensively. And if you don't have those guys on the roster, perhaps the roster construction this year is they were expecting Carson Beck to be the first-round pick. The way this team was built, when you pop the hood and you look at it, you look at the circuit board, think how much better even like an A.D. Mitchell type guy. We're banging the table saying, how about a Ryan Williams? How about a Jeremiah J.J. Smith? A Ladd McConkey or an A.D. Mitchell type, not even a Pickens, those type of guys, or even a DeAndre Swift type at running back. Those type of guys would have given you a little bit of that horsepower under the engine you're looking for.
Yeah, let me just do 2 things real quick. I'm going to let you go because I know you're ready to get back home as much as we are. So thing number 1 is this, which is like some of the guys that you mentioned are really good players, and they're guys that I'm really glad to have on Georgia's roster. Colby Young, obviously putting his legal issues aside, is a really good player. You're really happy to have him on your team. Trevor Etienne is a really good player. You're really happy to have him on your team. There are a lot of examples of them on the Georgia roster, and I mean this with all due respect. They're not bailing you out, though. You got to have a guy that bails you out of a tough situation. That's what Brock Bowers could do. I believe Ladd McConkey was good enough to do that. Maybe there are times since Georgia career when he did. You've got to have a guy that, to use the basketball analogy, that you just a really, really comfortable ball in his hand game on the line. And you're probably right. I don't want to throw, dirt here today more than we have to, but they probably did pay a lot of money to Carson Beck in the hope that Beck would elevate those around him. And for whatever reason this year, that didn't quite really happen. I don't know if that's Beck's fault or not. I don't know if it's Mike Bobo's fault. Maybe it's just how it was. So maybe Georgia put too many of its dollars in the quarterback's pocket this year, and the quarterback didn't elevate the level of the program as much as they thought he would. In the age which we live in now, you sort of have to have these conversations, as kind of distasteful as they are. I don't like doing this stuff necessarily, but how you choose to spend your money as a program is the single most important question that exists in college football. And whatever's second most important is so far down the list you can't even really see it. So maybe Georgia just gave too much money to a quarterback that for whatever reason, didn't end up being as good as many of us thought that he would be. And maybe that's why there's no obvious playmaker on the field for Georgia last night.
You know, Brandon, it's kind of simple. You know, what does Kirby and the program say? Time to go to the doctor, time to see what's going on. I'm of the belief that you sit there and you go, you know, I was trying to think about your I don't want to say pining, but your hopes to have that superstar on the roster. And the thought that crossed my mind is it's pretty simple. It's like fan bases know it coming in, coordinators know it coming in. It's like, we've got to know where that guy is on every play. Like, that guy every play design needs to be accounting for him having somebody walking around him like shadow guards. And Georgia just simply doesn't have that on this team. And, you know, to try to clarify, dial on a point I said a second ago, I think the way this team will have to be built, because I don't see a, you know, SEC level starter hopping into the portal or whatever. I think it looks like with what Gunner showed, his experience, that, you know, if you've got to sit there and think what you have for next year, you've got to surround Gunner with more of those guys. And you need to make that Colby Young guy a really tough number 3 receiver or number 4 receiver, and then Etienne's another guy where you look at and he's like, yeah, but they got to worry about all these guys first before they have to deal with Etienne. And you and I had snippets of this conversation on the air last night, Brandon, you know, I'm a guy that tries to focus what my job role is what Georgia needs to win the last game of this season. Are they targeting the right players? Are they seeing the right players? And, you know, to me, it's kind of a focus shift where, do I need to write a lot of stories about Georgia needs to get this next great 5-star linebacker? Do they need to own the trenches like they do? I think, you know, and a really wise coach told me once is like, man, spend all that money you can on those wide receivers, and that's going to make that above-average quarterback look a whole lot better.
So let me finish with this, and then, like I said, we'll let you go, and we'll have months to talk about all this. I don't know. I'm going to reserve the right to change my mind because I haven't slept much. I'm ready to go home. I don't know that I've got full faculties right now. But this is the point I reserve the right to change my mind about. When I am listening to you talk, the thing that I'm thinking about is not let me go peruse the class of 2026 on the various national websites and let me see who that guy is, you know, in Modern Day or IMG or Colquitt County. I'm thinking transfers right now, Jeff. That has not been my thing. I love high school recruiting. I love high school football. Frankly, I think that high school football has sort of been ruined by all of this imposed chaos on the sport. I mean, I think that the sport of football has been asked to shoulder so much. Almost all of it has been intentionally designed chaos to create the circumstances that exist right now, and I can't stand it. But I also can't change it, and so therefore you got to play the ball where it lies. And if you want to compete, as I'm listening to all this, I'm not thinking who are the best guys in the class of 2026. I'm thinking, as you just said, well, is there anybody that's going to go in the portal that's not there right now? Because frankly, what is there is a little bit picked over, but it's also maybe not robust necessarily at the moment anyway. Honesty compels me to admit. But the whole time we're sitting here thinking about, ooh, who do you bring in? What do you do? What do you do? Probably for the first time in my life, I am not thinking about high school players as I make that consideration.
You got to get those kind of grown men, the guys that have, you know, been 2 or 3 years in at least a weight program, and 19, 20-year-old guys. First of all, I gotta put a big focus on you. Can I? You haven't patented that I reserve the right to change my mind line, have you? Because that would help in some parenting skills. Yeah. That would help in some. You know, I've got an incredible marriage, but you know, if I ever break that one out sometime, that one might work.
Especially if you say it like very matter of factly, like it's an official declaration.
Yeah, like I mean, you and Gina haven't had an argument yet, but if you ever did, I think that would be great to put together. But Brendan, it's dudes, right? It's dudes, and you know what? It could be a coaching change. It could be guys going out of the portal. It may be somebody on another SEC roster that's like, man, my future, I didn't think that was that rosy. I don't think it's that rosy anymore. And you know, hey, I don't know if you've noticed. I don't know if you noticed, Brandon. Noah Thomas, is that name? Have you already circled that name and thought about that guy a little bit? Mm-hmm. Scored 8 touchdowns last year for Texas A&M. He's in the portal. Georgia's in the mix there with Texas and Miami. You know what that means? You're in the weeds with Texas and Miami for a playmaking wide receiver. That means those collective dollars might need to be at work. But another thing there is who do we have on the Georgia program that recruits receivers?
Yeah.
James Coley.
Yeah.
Who used to be at Texas A&M just last season?
Sure.
James Coley. So if Georgia is in the mix with anybody right there, if you're thinking like, hey, get me the phones, let's work the phones, let's see who's available, give me that transfer portal right there. I think if you get a 6'4" receiver that had 8 touchdowns last year playing for an SEC team, I think that's what you're looking for, Brandon, right?
Yeah, so good stuff from Jeff Sentell. I enjoy being with you on these trips. Fun to be part of your coverage and also to have you as we just make our way about town. I certainly appreciate that. Safe travels going back. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Brandon, I'll take my blazer off as I leave the broadcast so you feel better about me.
I'm just glad you dressed. I mean, I had no idea we were doing a dress code for the show now, but you look sharp, so I appreciate that.
Hey, man, this is the bottom line on the 2024 season, so I had to dress like, we're paying respects here.
There you go. Good stuff from Jeff Sentell.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, so I think as I'm listening to Jeff talk, and we're trying to be pretty honest about the fact that, boy, it seems like Georgia in some form or fashion is going to have to play the game. Maybe play the game a little bit more than it's been playing it, whether it's arms race, bidding wars for NIL, as aggressive as other teams are in the transfer portal. Maybe that's just what Georgia's got to be if it wants to advance past where it was here this year. And I didn't really watch much of this game last night. I just didn't. I mean, it's obviously pretty tied up with Georgia. Didn't see much of it all. But, Ole Miss won convincingly again last night. I mean, I don't know. It's as we sort of make sense of what happened with Georgia this year, we probably need to make sense of a team like Ole Miss too, because they are aggressive with spending. They are aggressive bringing transfer portal guys in. The truth is, they may be the team in the country that would actually perform the best in the playoff if they were still in it. I mean, people seem to think Ohio State's a hot team right now. Maybe Ole Miss is the team that can give them the best game, but somehow they still lost, 3 times? So what happened there? Because they did spend big. They brought in transfer portal players. They were outstanding. Yet somehow they still lost 3 times. Was that particular to something about Ole Miss and maybe the way that Lane Kiffin made decisions? Was that a byproduct of having so many transfers? It's at least worth considering that, because right now the Ole Miss model, I have to admit, and as Jeff and I were just joking about, I reserve the right to change my mind about this, but the Ole Miss model right now looks a little bit attractive, at least based on kind of what they at times had when they really, really needed it here this season. Let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Yesterday we had our DawgNation Invasion tailgate, and I had so many folks there talk about how that they've been hearing us talk about the DawgNation cruise, and it's almost one of those things where, and I do get this, people are like, well, BA, is it really going to be that much fun? Because I'm a big loudmouth guy. I do ad reads for a living. So I probably have a way of making things sound good, whether they are or not, just because that's what I do for a living. But I can tell you this genuinely. I love taking Royal Caribbean cruise vacations. I love being on Utopia of the Seas. I take my own personal vacations on Royal Caribbean cruises as frequently as I can. I have a great time. And one of the great sources of pride for me is that so many Georgia fans do the same thing and come with us on these DawgNation cruises. And now that we're kind of on the other side of the season, and now that 2025 is here, well, I start thinking about, okay, well, when is my cruise travel going to come here in 2025? I'm thinking about that and always paying very close attention to that kind of thing. So I want you to reach out to Jessica Slater, and I want you to plan a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation here in 2025. Jessica's a great travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean to help get that done. You can talk to Jessica, and she can lay out all the stuff going on there for you about how to make this a great, great experience for you here. You can email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. You can give her a call at the number that you're going to see on the screen there. And in fact, let me give you that number here too. You can give a chance to be a part of that with her. 770-71. Very smooth as always. 770-718-9147. I can't see. My eyesight's not apparently very good. The number's on your screen if you're watching on video. Give her a call. You think after all these years I'd have it memorized, but nonetheless, give her a call and be a part of that. Jessica Slater, a great travel agent, Royal Caribbean, allowing us to go cruising around the SEC here right now. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things here for a moment. First of all, let's do a Georgia thing in here. We are about to have an onslaught of news that's never all that much fun. Some of this is going to be NFL draft declarations. A lot of this is going to be transfer portal. And the piece that we made, I think certainly on this show, was leading into the college football playoff. I was very grateful that Georgia didn't have a lot of distractions. You know, you had Julian Humphrey doing what he did. You had Michael Jackson doing what he did. You had a handful of guys doing whatever. But for the most part, Georgia players were content to keep their focus on the team, allow the team to be the focus for everybody else. And Georgia, at least by visual appearances, seemed pretty locked in going into the college football playoff. Well, the trade-off for that is it's all going to come in waves now that it's over. And this is just whatever the opposite of spoils of victory are, the agony of defeat. This is sort of the agony of defeat for a college team right now, is you're going to start seeing name after name after name start to put their name in the portal, make those draft declarations. We're going to see an exodus of Georgia players off this roster. That's just how it goes. Thankfully, you didn't have that prior to the game. The focus was allowed to kind of be made on the game, but that's about to happen. So stay buckled up for that. In this day and age, there is literally nothing that you can do about that. Some of these players may be disappointing. Some of these players, if we're also just being honest, may free up some dollars to go after the kinds of players we're saying that Georgia needs, because who you choose to spend your money on and how do you get a big enough bucket for the very best players you can go after, that is just, in this professionalized world of college football, that is how business is going to get to be done. So some guys leaving a necessity for who you want to bring in or who you want to keep and how you kind of move the dollars around the board a bit. That is just a topic that's going to be going on around Georgia football, and that is unavoidable. You've also got now the semifinal set for the college football playoff. I could not be, and I don't mean to be sour grapes here, but I'm just being honest, I could not be less excited. I don't know, y'all. Maybe we'll watch these games when they happen. I got no interest in Penn State, Notre Dame. I've got no interest in Texas and Ohio State. I'll probably end up watching that game. In all honesty, I'll probably end up watching that game, but not with any sense of enjoyment, not with any sense of excitement. And because I'm just in a terrible mood, just an absolutely awful mood. Because I'm in an awful mood, let me just say one thing, and then we'll get ready to move on. Hard not to notice, and perhaps if you're online, you've seen some of this too. Certain media types that never wanted to acknowledge the SEC's era of dominance while it was going on are now more than happy to reference it now that they believe that it's over. Hard not to notice that, right? Are you with me on this? That, when Oregon comes into the Big Ten, for instance, and kind of runs through that league in the regular season, didn't hear a lot about that of, what's wrong with the Big Ten? You got this newcomer who's, winning your league title and all that kind of stuff. I didn't hear much about that, but people seem more than happy to kind of pay attention to the fact that, there are no legacy SEC teams left in the playoff, and the fact that, you've got, like Georgia, for instance, losing to non-conference foes, something that's really, for the most part, not done in many, many years, we talked about earlier. A lot of these folks who never seem to want to give the SEC full credit for its dominance while it's happening are now more than happy to reference that dominance as a way of at least trying to rub it in our face that it might now be over. So if you ever want to know what the rules of engagement are in the college football conversation, pay attention to stuff like this. Just notice it. Just notice it and pay attention to that. We can't help but realize some of that's going on, and yet maybe that's just how it goes. Either way, we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I also want to give a shout-out here for a moment to our friends at the Finish Long Drink. We normally do a long finish here on our show. In lieu of that today, let me ask you to do this. I want you to go to our DawgNation YouTube page, and our guy Cody Chavins does a lot of great work kind of putting together like we'll call like shorts or clips, the short clips. We have a really good one up right now of Kirby Smart really saying some incredibly nice things about Jalen Walker and Tate Ratledge, two guys that were picked to sort of speak on behalf of the Georgia players last night. And I do think it's really, really important to kind of keep full context here. Of course we are disappointed that Georgia lost a game. And that disappointment, frankly, becomes some form of anger, right? Because the stakes are high. You go to work and everybody that you work with cheers for somebody else. They're ready to jump on you when Georgia loses because of how much trash we've all talked while Georgia was winning. And, coaches get paid $100 million. We can't pretend that the stakes aren't really, really high. So when you don't win, it is a problem, just flat out. It just is. The stakes are that high that when you don't win, there's going to be a lot of disappointment and some really tough questions to be asked. And frankly, that's just how life goes. But in the midst of all of that, there's also room to kind of appreciate what we have seen from Georgia here, too. And in the weeks and months to come, we'll obviously talk a lot about the SEC championship and some courageous wins that Georgia got and players like Tate Ratledge and Jalen Walker who really kind of made all that possible. And I thought that Kirby Smart had some really nice things to say about those guys last night. So go to the DawgNation YouTube page. You can see more of that. Appropriate to appreciate the good stuff while we're also a little bit disappointed by the other stuff from the way this season comes to an end. Of course, our friends at the Finish Long Drink, you can find them online at thelongdrink.com. And you can put in your zip code. You can find out where to pick some up. Obviously, looking forward to some fun stuff here in 2025. We're always taking the Finish Long Drink with us when we're doing that, whether it's the peach-flavored version, the Long Drink Cranberry, Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, the Long Drink Traditional Citrus, that's the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the Gin Kick. You can enjoy all of that with them. And with that, we'll also get ready to sign off on our coverage here from New Orleans. And obviously, for a moment here, we'll take it back to where we've been the last few days. It is always awkward to transition back into regular life and football, given what many of us experienced. And while thankfully I wasn't impacted by this personally, the horrible attack that took place here in New Orleans a few days ago, it is really eerie to be this adjacent to it. We're literally just outside the window and off to the left, a couple of blocks down the road. That's where all of it went down. The videos that you've seen, that's where it took place. It's just a shocking and terrible and frankly scary thing to be that close to a terrorist attack. And in so many ways, and so many people in New Orleans over the course of the last couple of days have had to try to make sense of just how close they were to it and just how horrific it is to see the impact of those who were obviously, personally affected by this, lives that were lost, people that were hurt and injured, including within our own UGA community here too. And our sadness does not end even as we kind of get back to work and even as we go back home. And I think I mentioned this on our postgame show last night. Our prayers for New Orleans will continue even as we're back in Georgia or traveling back to wherever it is that you may live, I should say. I did notice a couple of the videos that came out yesterday of, the city trying to get back to normal. Bourbon Street has reopened. There was a really moving picture of the New Orleans police officers who kind of act as security there at Bourbon Street. There's always a pretty large security presence there on Bourbon Street, the mounted police officers, things like that. There was a huge ovation for them returning back to work. And I've had a lot of interactions this week with the New Orleans police folks just because they've been out in such large numbers, and they've all been so kind but also so brave. We've seen videos of how they responded to what went down, and you perhaps have noticed they're running towards the action in the midst of a really scary scene. And so that's inspiring. It is. You hate the circumstances that made it necessary, but it's inspiring. So as we leave New Orleans here, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who works hard every year to make the Sugar Bowl a prestigious event, and some of the great moments in Georgia history have taken place in New Orleans. And so it's always cool to come back here and reminisce on some of that. And frankly, it's fun to be a part of a really cool southern city like this that's got incredible history and so much culture. I feel incredibly privileged to be a part of it and look forward to being back here again at some point in time in happier circumstances. And to everyone who's still trying to make sense of this tragedy, and everyone who's just hurt by it, which is, of course, all of us, our prayers will be with all of you. So we are going to come back home. We'll be back to normal again on Monday from our DawgNation World Headquarters studios. But as we do that, and as we kind of go on about life, and as New Orleans itself tries to go on about its own life here, and get ready to start welcoming a lot more tourists here coming up in the very near future. Keep the city in your prayers. Keep all of us in our prayers as we try to make sense of things in the world that are just very, very hard to understand and explain. So that is the story on that. And, of course, when it comes to the Georgia Bulldogs, there will be happier times, of course, too. This is a program that's given us plenty of big wins to celebrate over the years. We know there'll be plenty more of those to come in the years, too. Unfortunately, though, last night, not one of those. Thanks so much for being here as part of DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you back here again on Monday. And on video time now for our RS Andrews cool down. Y'all, we're not going to do very many comments today because I am ready to go home. But I will do a couple here just for a moment. Let me say hello to some people on YouTube, and we'll see what's going on here right now. Christy, on the subject of all the distractions that have gone on here, great to hear from Christy in the comments. Christy was nice enough to reach out to us on X, too, to make sure we were all okay, so she's been very kind about all of that. I thought that Kirby Smart did a really good job of not using, while obviously paying respect to what had happened, not using any of that as an excuse for Georgia, because the honest truth is I don't think that it was. The issues that we saw from Georgia on the field last night are issues that Georgia has been dealing with for almost the entirety of the season. That's just kind of what it's been. And given a chance to use that as an excuse, to be completely honest, I was glad that Kirby Smart did not do that. Both the weirdness here in New Orleans, but also maybe from a football standpoint, the long layoff, where we can't act like when Georgia beat Texas for the SEC championship, the long layoff wasn't one of the things that we were celebrating. I really thought Georgia's only chance of winning the national championship was getting refreshed and renewed, reinvigorated, and that maybe a new energy would kind of show up for the playoff, because I don't know that we saw the same intangible quality at times from Georgia during the season that we've seen in previous seasons, but also I can't be for sure that I'm correct about that either, because the definition of intangible is you can't necessarily measure it. So I think it's an interesting point. This was obviously, for both these coaches and both these teams, unprecedented circumstances, and yet even in the midst of all of that, the stuff that we saw be problematic for Georgia is most of the same stuff that had been problematic during the year, too. BA's cardigan. Obviously a username in honor of one of the items of clothing I sometimes wear. Says, glad you're doing well. Happy New Year. We'll always have our cardigan. That's indeed right, BA's cardigan. You're absolutely right about that. D1 Georgia on Mike Bobo. Listen, these coaches make millions. They're big boys. I'm not going to stand in the way of your criticism of any of them. I'm just not. It is a results-oriented business. It's an expectations game. And I said this in the postgame show last night. I don't consider this season unsuccessful, because I think winning the SEC is a real accomplishment. And I think making the playoff is also a real thing. Like you can point to tangible achievements this year for Georgia. So from that standpoint, the season's not a failure. But Georgia did not meet expectations this year. They didn't. The expectation was a national championship. And Georgia's going to be concluding the season ranked, as low as they've been ranked in a long time, probably, right? So Georgia didn't meet expectations. And in a year in which you don't meet expectations, anything is fair game. So have at it as far as I'm concerned. Say whatever you want to say. All I can do is share my opinion, which is, if you gave me the power to make one change to Georgia, I think I would use that power to allocate larger sums of money to go after A-list players. However you want to define elite level players, a small handful of elite level players, a little bit of a different allocation for NIL dollars, and frankly, a more aggressive commitment to playing the NIL game. I believe if I can make one change for Georgia, that's the change that I would make. Now, people would say, well, you can do that and you can change coaches, things like that. Maybe you could. But my focus, my interest right now is, what do you do to truly maximize the talent on the field for Georgia? And I don't see any answer to that question that doesn't somehow center around the dollars that you're spending. We'll take a couple of the comments here for a moment, y'all, and then we're going to get ready to go. Pizza Man says it's Ohio State years. Nobody's beating them. I mean, this is and I don't disrespect Pizza Man, he's a good commenter, but this is sort of the thing that sometimes happens, which is you see a lot of online commentary that's essentially an amplification of the thing that just happened. And that's just not how football works. And frankly, I took a lot of heat from a lot of y'all for a good while because I told you that I thought that Georgia could lose to Notre Dame. That's not very good business for me. This is a pro-Georgia show. To say that ahead of a big game, I think there's a chance that Georgia might lose. I mean, that's a pretty risky thing for me to say because I'm not making my sort of top constituency very happy by saying that sort of thing. I hope you'll trust me to know that if I say something like that, I probably have a pretty good reason for feeling the way that I do because it's not a very incentivized point of view. But the point is, one of the reasons why people thought I was so wrong about that was that wasn't the last thing they had seen. Well, the last thing they saw was Georgia beat Texas. So therefore, history began with the last thing that we saw. And that's just not how college football works. And the same thing is true for Ohio State. People were laughing at me before the playoff began because I picked Ohio State to play for the national championship. We sort of saw this coming for Ohio State far before it happened, and they've pretty much played the way that I sort of assumed they had the capabilities of. People laughed at us when we predicted it, though, because the last thing they had seen was Ohio State losing to Michigan. So let's be careful now not getting too fixated on also now the most recent thing we've seen from Ohio State, which is them looking good and winning games. They have certainly played the best of anybody in this postseason here thus far, but I don't view Ohio State as unbeatable. I don't view this game for Georgia last night as unwinnable. I think that Georgia, had it played better, would have had a chance to still win the national championship. As flawed as Georgia is, they still could have won the national championship. And as well as Ohio State has now played in 2 playoff games, I don't believe that makes them unbeatable. In fact, if you gave me, of the 4 teams remaining, Ohio State versus the field, I would still take the field, and I said that as somebody who picked Ohio State to play for the national championship and sort of saw this coming before it happened. This is just not a year in which anything can be said definitively. Ohio State might win the national championship, but nothing right now can be said definitively. And every time I've said that thus far this year, I've been, frankly, kind of proven correct about it. So let's just sort of keep that in mind, that Ohio State, after 2 weeks of the playoff, is playing very well. But if Georgia could have found a way to play a little bit better, or anybody, Texas or Penn State or whatever else, this is still a game that could be won. So let me go to Facebook here for a moment, just at least say hello to them, and then after that we're getting off the air. I did some DawgNation.com comments a little earlier on Facebook, and then we're going for today. By the way, I am not in a train station. It looks like I am. The media center got shut down. We decided not to do any more shows in the street, so that's kind of how that's just sort of going. Jim Blair said I was worried about Notre Dame's defense, and they showed it. Yeah. And I asked Sean McDonough, who called the game last night on TV, that directly going into the week, because let's just be honest, we use the word humbling in the headline today because, frankly, this is a humbling experience for many Georgia fans. Georgia did not believe that a team like Notre Dame could play at the same level that Georgia did. If we're being honest, that's just the majority of Dog Nation, so to speak, just did not believe that was true. But that is ultimately kind of what happened. Jim also mentioned the Georgia defense played well. It did. Let's see what else. Yeah, so Keith Finley says that Georgia stoops to the level of the opposing teams. Sometimes it sort of seems like that's true, but also, if you define consistency as sort of playing in a high, people they're not very consistent, but the truth is Georgia actually was kind of consistent. They were sort of consistently good, but rarely elite. When people say the word consistent in sports, sometimes what they mean is our team didn't play consistently great, and Georgia did not do that, but they did have a consistent level of performance, which was good. Georgia was a good team this year. Georgia was below the standard that it's been at in recent years. Georgia was better than almost every team, but that's not how Georgia measures itself. It measures itself against the small group of teams who are vying to be the best team, and this season ends, and I we can say with full certainty that Georgia's just not in that category right now. They could have still won the national championship if balls bounced their way the way that they did a few times during the season. Georgia could have done it. We were all kind of bracing last night for another one of these sort of fun miracle comebacks. But Georgia always found themselves in need of fun miracle comebacks this season because unlike previous Georgia teams, they weren't dominating from the start. And that is just sort of what Georgia was. And how it kind of improves from that level to where it needs to go for the future is undoubtedly going to be one of the big conversations of this offseason. Let me also say this. I really appreciate the incredible privilege of being able to talk to you. And I love it during the season. I love it out of the season. I just love it. I love my job. I love being around Georgia football. I love Georgia football. And I know many of you feel the same way. It's just an incredibly, I'm just incredibly grateful to be around all of this. And I am sad when the season comes to an end. I am just a guy that functions better in season. I love having a game week to week. I love having all of that. But I also think this is going to be a really compelling offseason for Georgia, too. So I do not take for granted that all of you allow me to have a small part in your experience as a Georgia fan, kind of narrating a portion of that experience. That is something that means a lot to me. And I hope that you'll continue to allow me to do that in the weeks to come, because there are some big and very interesting things to happen on the way for Georgia football, and also some really happy memories to reflect back on, and we'll look forward to doing all of that and have plenty more conversations that are much happier than the one we're forced to have here today. So enjoy your start to 2025. If you're on your way back home from New Orleans, please be safe doing that. To all of you, get ready to enjoy a great weekend. I'm looking forward to resting up and then hopefully getting some rest anyway, and then being back in our friendly confines on Monday, getting ready to do the show the way we always do. So we will look forward to talking to you then, and appreciate our friends at RS Andrews who make it possible. Find them online, rsandrews.com. I'm told there's snow coming, so if that's the case, that you are going to want that heating system charged up and ready to go, our friends at RS Andrews give you a chance to do that. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll talk to you back in Georgia on Monday.